Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Colonel Mike Taylor, who is the Director for Counterterrorism at the Global Engagement Center for the United States Department of State in Washington, D.C. And you will hear us refer to the Global Engagement Center as the GEC. Mike Taylor, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Hey, John. Great. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure. I know it's been a while setting this up and look forward to the conversation.
Likewise. So the conversation I'd like to have with you today, Mike, will cover counterterrorism and the Global Engagement Center. We've had people on the podcast from throughout the Department of Defense and the private sector, some intelligence community members, some academics, and finally some of our NATO and Five Eye partners. As a military employee at the State Department, our audience would be very keen to get your take on the information problem in general.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I guess I'll start, as we look at the information space today, I would say that authoritarianism poses a clear threat to the global interests of the US, democracies, and open societies. Now, a key weapon in the authoritarian arsenal is their willingness to lie to public audiences, limit freedom of expression and independent media in their own nations, while exploiting freedom of expression and independent media in open societies. Now, these dynamics are not new, but modern communications and technology has greatly exacerbated the impact of their deceptive public engagement. At the same time, competition for the attention of foreign audiences is intense, and earning trust, attention, and favorable opinion requires intentional, principled, and consistent engagement. To this end, the State Department is working with our interagency partners while maintaining a full spectrum approach to counter the influence of authoritarian regimes, and equally as important, to demonstrate in word and deed the value of democratic governance, government transparency, and the rules-based international order. I'll add to that the State Department's 4,000 public diplomacy professionals at 185 US embassies and consulates worldwide engage publics through social media, traditional media, and in-person interactions.
Yeah, that's great, Mike. And to our audience, you should also go and check out another episode that we had with one of Mike's colleagues at the State Department, Roger Carstens, where we get into some of these issues as well. So, Mike, some in our audience are probably unfamiliar with the State Department's Global Engagement Center, or the GEC's mission. Could you get a little bit into the mission and some of the recent history as to how you guys got to where you are?
Absolutely, happy to do so. So the GEC was founded by President Obama's executive order in 2016, which was later codified into law in 2017 in the National Defense Authorization Act. As some folks are aware, the GEC grew out of what used to be the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communications, or CSCC, which focused on countering groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda online. Today, the GEC's mission has expanded to take on exposing and countering foreign disinformation and propaganda from countries like Russia, China, the PRC, and Iran, as well as continuing with our original mission against non-state actors. In 2019, the NDAA also directed the GEC to direct, lead, synchronize, integrate, and coordinate efforts of the federal government to recognize, understand, expose, and counter foreign state and non-state propaganda and disinformation efforts aimed at undermining or influencing the policy, security, or stability of the U.S., allies, and partner nations. Now, with that, fulfilling this mandate requires continuous engagement with the public sector and private sector partners globally, synchronization at the strategic, operational, and tactical level, sophisticated data analytics, and a global programmatic footprint. Now, the GEC with that mission focuses on leveraging research, data analytics, technology, and a network of partner nations and civil society influencers to build societal resilience to disinformation and propaganda from our adversaries. And the last piece I'll add in is that the GEC plays today a critical role in supporting the administration's strategic objectives. First, to work alongside fellow democracies and free societies across the globe to deter and defend against disinformation and propaganda from the PRC, Russia, Iran, and foreign non-state actors. And second, to coalesce our collective strength to prevail in the strategic competition with the PRC, ensuring that we and like-minded partners set the international agenda, working together to protect our interests and shared values through exposing and countering their disinformation and propaganda.
Right. Can I ask a small little sidebar question? So you're an active duty Army officer working within the State Department and the GEC. How many military personnel are working with you? Is this a typical thing to have DoD personnel working in the State Department?
Absolutely. On the military side, the DoD provides up to 99 military advisors to serve across the department. My position, along with two other military officers, are information operations professionals, FA-30s from U.S. Army, and are integrated into the GEC structure. I started back 3.5 years ago, focused on counterterrorism. I've continued that to date. And the other two colleagues joined the GEC and served in plans and operations roles. Going forward, the three military are going to focus on advising the front office as senior military advisor, and then the two planners are going to serve as campaign planners for the China division and the Russia division. In addition to that, we have other detailees or LNOs from across the department that are integrated in, both from SOCOM. We've got LNOs down at CENTCOM and other places like that. So we are much better, I think, focused on integrating with DoD than we have in the past, given the three positions we have today are the first three, I'll call it permanent military detailees, which prior to that, they've been intermittent, depending on the availability of personnel.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Great. That was helpful. So, in you describing the GEC's mission, I think you made it pretty clear. It is an outward-looking mission, using the United States as the point of reference, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of look at the GEC as a mission center, looking at kind of a hub and spoke model. I kind of liken it to General McChrystal's book, Team of Teams, where you have, or Network of Networks is what we call it, all foreign focused. The idea is, how do we bring together our partners, both in the interagency, but also allies and international partners, as well as academia, private sector, to focus on certain problems and contribute and collaborate to solutions.
Yeah. So, can you describe how you and your colleagues assess the impact of your engagement efforts?
Yeah, that's an easy question, right? I
Yeah,
would
that's
say
right.
we we look at I think first we look at the scope of our operational footprint as one factor to assess impact. For example, we have over 100 programs running in 120 countries. We've held 75 tech demos that are led by our technology and engagement division, as well as 4 tech challenges with 3 upcoming. And we've also tested 40 different analytical tools through our test bed for international partners, with 18 of those tools being adopted. As you know, one of the challenges is setting the right measuring sticks when it comes to messaging or assessing the impact. And First there's the challenge of data. How can we get the best picture of our target audiences across diverse geography? An example I like to bring up is our recent work in the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS. The GEC led a multinational campaign against the former ISIS emir Al-Mawla. And with that, we relied on our international partners to help us assess the information environment, as well as the target audiences before and after our efforts. So basically establishing the baseline, and then did we move the needle or not, as the campaign unfolded. To guide that effort, we developed a framework, an assessment framework that identified specific indicators we collectively, both the US government and coalition partners, would look for to determine whether we actually move the needle, to include with the target audiences. A second challenge that we kind of wrestle with is platform visibility. Presence of ISIS propagandists in the online space is not in any one nation's backyard. So we've had to work across media platforms to determine impact. And finally, I would say probably the trickiest balance is how do we capture short, medium, and long-term impacts? We understand the fight against our adversaries is not just 30, 60, 90 days, even though we'd like to bin it that way, but it could be years or even generational in scope. And so on top of that, we work as closely with the intelligence community and foreign partners to see the change we set in motion. And we acknowledge that we know that some of these effects are not visible in a short time frame, nor are they visible publicly. So we measure engagement across multiple timelines. And so to that end, we've recently completed an assessment of the de-ISIS Al-Mawla campaign, which collected data over a period of 18 months to kind of address some of the challenges we faced with measuring effectiveness.
Yeah, that is a sprawling problem. Everything from like the proliferation of platforms, like new channels of communication, which I'm sure are popping up all over the place, and to the changing slang within countries. So it's hard enough to do text analytics or natural language analytics within the United States and our changing discourse, but you guys have to have tools which are keeping pace with the ever-changing dialogue and slang and context for, well, the entire globe. I mean, that is one heck of a problem.
Yet I would say that, to help with that, the fact that we have 185 embassies, we've got public diplomacy professionals on the ground, that are immersed in the information environment there locally. And so I think that the benefit is tapping into that level of expertise there, and then also the desk officers at our regional bureaus that we work with closely, and then our functional bureau colleagues in counterterrorism, INR and other places. And so with that, though, it's also, constantly assessing through leveraging products, polling. USAGM is a key partner in understanding and leveraging what they see in the information environment, how technology is changing communications means, and then making sure we have got as best as we can understanding the environment before we embark in some kind of an effort against, one of the threats that I had mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another kind of follow-up, add-on, rabbit hole kind of a question here, Mike. Something that has been getting more and more press lately is being able to effectively leverage OSINT, or open source intelligence. How has that come into your world over the last few years?
Yeah, I think so. I mentioned that the GEC focuses on data analytics. We're a data-driven organization, and that's why we have 30-ish or so data scientists that are in our analytics and research division. And everything we do is driven by data. And so understanding and having access to what's going on in open source, but also tying in, sometimes it doesn't require us to have access. It just requires us to know who does have access and be able to tap into that knowledge to help bring it together. And so, yeah, we're looking at, different partners out there that are providing awareness of what's going on, across the globe. We have priority regions, can't focus everywhere, but those priority regions, we have, I think, this network, the hub and spoke idea, that model. I think that's where you tap into the power of, what's going on in open source. And with that, we have a platform called GECIQ Insights Quantified that has been in existence for the last couple of years. And a lot of our interagency partners and international partners have used that as a platform to share what's going on, what they're seeing, look at disinformation or propaganda trends, and help inform what do we do about it, if anything, depending on what it is and where it's occurring.
Okay, well, this has been fantastic so far, Mike, but this has all kind of been a bit of a wind up to talk about the kinds of things that you guys are actually doing. How are you putting these types of policy directives into action with the GEC?
Yeah, no, fantastic question. I think, first of all, starting with the GEC's Russia division, exposes Kremlin-funded media disinformation campaigns. Most recent GEC reporting informed efforts by major social media companies to address false content, ensure platform accounts are appropriately identified, and suspended accounts that violate their terms of service. Again, all of this with the idea of how do we recognize, understand, then expose and counter is kind of the vein that we're approaching this from. The GEC also actively exposes information these actors seek to hide. Our China division supports a range of programs within this line of effort, such as the development of the largest online repository of open source data on the PRC's atrocities in Xinjiang. This has provided audiences from around the world with access to objective information about the PRC's egregious human rights atrocities and genocide in Xinjiang. Our GEC Iran division is focused on exposing and countering destabilizing Iranian influence globally by sponsoring investigative reporting aimed at providing facts to Farsi speakers globally. And near and dear to my heart, the CT division counters terrorist and VEO propaganda through strategic messaging, which aims to discredit these groups and degrade their ability to recruit members, supporters, and sympathizers. Now, with that, I do want to take an opportunity to share a little bit more about our work in the CT space. And we break it down into really 3 lines of effort. First is planning and implementing proactive, mid to long-term U.S. interagency and international partnered counter-propaganda and disinformation campaigns. It's a mouthful, but it's proactive campaigns. And the idea is to take the initiative in the information space at a time and place of our choosing and force the adversary, in this case, ISIS or Al-Qaeda or whoever, to react and make mistakes while creating more opportunities to exploit. Our second line of effort is strengthening the ability of our networks, including allies, the global coalition to defeat ISIS, partner nations, and private sector, as well as academia, to combat VEO propaganda and ideologies. And really what this is talking about is degrading brand appeal. And the idea with this is we are better together when we combine resources, ideas, analysis, access to maximize impact. And our third line of effort is building resilience among vulnerable audiences through programming that helps them to better reject the deceptive and manipulative tactics of extremist organizations and other high control groups, as well as their logical fallacies, so frequently used by the leaders to mask holes in their narratives. Now, this translates to getting left of radicalization and disinformation. We know that once disinformation is out there, it's hard to challenge tweet for tweet. So we take a preventive approach and work to build resiliency in vulnerable populations in key regions of the globe. Now, shifting to kind of a case, I call it a case study on this, I'd like to highlight a recent global coalition campaign success, which combined all three of these efforts, and it's called the Defeat ISIS Al-Mawla campaign.
Yeah.
This was part of a larger U.S. government resiliency strategic communications framework focused on Iraq and Syria, but expanding to other parts of the globe as the coalition starts to look at areas like South Central Asia and, of course, Africa. Now, I don't know how many folks are aware of the former ISIS emir was named Al-Mawla, his true name, but he was also known as Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Quraishi. But he was in coalition forces back in Iraq and coalition forces custody in Iraq back in 2008. And there he provided actionable intelligence, which enabled coalition forces to hunt down the top Islamic State leaders. In particular, the then number 2 IS leader, Abu Kaswara. And so that by sharing that information, Al-Mawla cleared his way to the top of the organizational structure. So back in September of 2020, the GEC, we released 3 recently declassified tactical interrogation reports to the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point. As you know, they are experts in analyzing a lot of this information. They were the ones that published the Bin Laden letters back in 2010-11 timeframe. And then we followed up with 53 additional reports in April of 2021. Now, these releases led to a multinational effort to expose the truth about the ISIS leader and erode support for the Islamic State, and then ultimately cementing his legacy forever and that of the organization as one of betrayal and failure. After the release of the TIRs, news media, online chatter about Al-Mawla in both English and Arabic shifted. Before the release, Google Analytics showed that Al-Mawla was most often referred to as the destroyer. But after the TIRs were released, the ISIS leader was most often called the betrayer, and my personal favorite, the Canary Caliph. Even reports about his death in February of this year still prominently featured the betrayal narrative as part of his legacy. And so kind of understanding that our approach is how do you degrade brand appeal? How do you expose the truth about these organizations? This is one way to do so. And it really leveraged the campaign approach. It leveraged working with partners to include the Global Coalition, which consists of 85 nations and organizations. We, the GEC, are the U.S. co-lead for the Communications Working Group, which comprises 50-ish or so nations and organizations focused on degrading ISIS in the information space. And then lastly, we leveraged our programming that we have on the ground in the core, Iraq, Syria, to really amplify what we were releasing. But the real success, I think, was the idea of the hub and spoke model, and then pulling together our partners across the US government, the IC to assess effectiveness, and our international partners to really carry the message as credible voices, knowing full well the US, we aren't always the most credible messenger, depending on the topic and the target audience, to be frank.
My goodness. Well, that is quite an exemplar indeed. Do you think we could make available to the audience, Mike, those 3 reports that you mentioned? That's there. We can get some links to those for the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the easiest thing is just to search and pull up the Counterterrorism Center at West Point. All 56 are posted there, along with the analytics, their analysis, and really interesting when you read into the dynamics and what's going on inside these groups, which typically you don't get to see very often. In this case, it was a tremendous opportunity to, again, expose the truth about the leader and the organization at large.
Yeah. Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, we will in fact have a link to those in the show notes for those who are interested to take a deeper dive.
Yeah, John, one of the other things I want to add in is our work in the technology side of the house. As we know, modern technology has evolved in how we communicate, and the adversary is doing the same to take advantage of those advances. So One of the things that our technology engagement division in the GEC has led is with the all-out Russian invasion of Ukraine, we've definitely seen a shift to new digital platforms and systems for the offensive and defensive dissemination of disinformation. Platforms such as Telegram, Discord, and Viber have emerged as centralizing government hubs for information operations, as well as by civil society and independent actors. With that, our technology engagement division is actively pursuing technological threat countermeasures, such as participating in regular information sharing sessions with counter disinformation and cybersecurity counterparts in Ukraine, with the goal of sharing best technological practices against Russian disinformation. Additionally, our Eastern Europe Tech Challenge last summer, resulted in support to Ukraine's Hromadsk Radio and Debunk EU, which we use their radio and meme technologies against the further Russian invasion of Ukraine. And lastly, our technology engagement division is using its testbed to initiate tests of content aggregation technology, which is a new video development capability to measure and improve viewers' awareness of disinformation, and a novel influencer brokerage capability, all in support of Ukraine.
You know, something, Mike, that has come up on the podcast over and over again, and you've touched on this a little bit, but I just want to ask you a little bit more directly about the role of partnerships and relationship building, and the importance of that to the GEC's efforts. Do you think you could take a moment and talk about the kinds of relationships that you have and are building, not only within the State Department, but also within the United States national security community, and even amongst our partners and allies? I know that's a really big, broad, sweeping question, but just to get your kind of general comment on relationship building and the importance thereof.
You know, that's great question. You know, multifaceted. I think first within the department, cannot stress enough our collaboration with the regional bureaus who have boots on the ground, so to speak, as well as the functional bureaus, and to make sure that we are leveraging the wealth of experience and knowledge that the department brings in the foreign service arena. I think that's number one. With that, though, even our diplomatic engagements, which the GEC is uniquely situated. When you look at the elements of national power, you know, we have a foot in the diplomatic and the information side. And so pulling those two together and harnessing those two together through our regional and functional bureaus and their diplomatic engagements, I think allows us to really be much more effective in countering propaganda and disinformation. External to the department within the US government, we have in multiple forums that I'll speak to CT. You know, we lead interagency working groups that develop the campaigns like the one I mentioned, focused on ISIS, Al-Qaeda, even racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists. That's kind of nascent but in development. And so bringing together the interagency at the appropriate level to talk about, you know, how do we put pen to paper and translate the policy into action? And again, that takes regular touch points and coordination, but also I would say building trust and confidence, at least within the CT community, that, hey, you know, this is a value add. And so I think we've proven that over the last couple of years. And with that, all of that is in concert with our National Security Council partners, in particular, Pound CT, and that whole team up there, and making sure that, you know, the policy, you know, we're able to translate on the CT side into action. With international partners, from a CT perspective, it's definitely the Global Coalition. But I would also say there are other partnerships out there like the Quad and others that are focused on, you know, nation state actors. But I cannot stress enough the importance of together and building those coalitions, those partnerships, so that we can share ideas, share thoughts on how do we approach the disinformation problem set. And I go back to, you know, our GEC Insights Quantified as a platform that actually enables us to have that information sharing.
Wow, Mike, you and your colleagues are obviously you know, doing some great work, and it's like an always on thing. The case study you presented, that's one of, I'm sure, several dozen irons in the fire that you guys have right now. But before we let you go, do you think you could perhaps provide a book recommendation that it could be related to the kinds of things you were talking about, or anything else that's on your nightstand that you think our audience might appreciate?
Yeah, I'll give you two recommendations. Both I'm currently going through. One is called Active Measures by Thomas Rid, really insightful into the disinformation problem set, and I would argue the disinfodemic that we are in the midst of. So I think it's very insightful, tapping into historical, data and examples from the Cold War. So that's one. The second I would recommend just is The Fortunes of Africa by Martin Meredith, which looks at the history of Africa, given that, that is, I think, an untapped resource, potential, opportunity. But also we know our adversaries are vying for influence in Africa, and understanding the dynamics and all of that goes into the history of Africa, I think is very important.
All right. Well, we will have links to those books and the other resources that we mentioned in the show notes. And with that, Colonel Mike Taylor, thank you so much for being a guest on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.